But is the traffic reporter working with the meteorologist, studying wind patterns? Truly, the sea, truly, with patterns of moisture from the respiration from the trees, that the temperature of the land, and then it gasifies the moisture, then the moisture rises. So, anyways, are they studying this so they know and can improve highways? So these things matter. So again, are they out here, a politician, driving in the rain, looking at the highway? Because they're supposed to be advocates for the taxpayer and making sure their dollars being spent correctly. So they oversee the construction. They don't have to know about construction. They just have to drive the highway and notice how they're getting affected. So that's why they do drug studies, and they're supposed to teach you in drug studies what the side effects and what to look for. So you have a baseline where you are, and then you look for things getting worse. But they're supposed to teach you how to notice the things. Like a doctor's supposed to teach you the side effects and go over with it. Look for a skin rash here. Look for a skin rash there. Feel your neck, and if you feel any bulging in the glands that are right here, let me know. Here, see, the doctor can feel them and say, see, feel them now. And if you feel it getting stiffer or protruding more, meaning the gland getting harder, or the gland getting more inflamed, meaning bigger, that they're supposed to tell them. The doctor, in prescriptions, before they even give them to you, they're supposed to go over the side effects and what to look for. But does a doctor do that in the doctor's office? No. When you give chemotherapy, you tell them if your stomach is getting upset, if you have nausea, let me know. These are things we have to look for, because nausea means you're basically, yes, and diarrhea as well, but nausea, let's just take it. That means you can't take down food, and that means you're going to be nutritionally deprived. And yes, if you're vomiting, you're going to be dehydrated and can't hold down food, and you're going to be nutritionally deprived faster. Nausea in pregnancy is not good because you can't take down food and nutrients. And you think, oh, morning sickness, it's just a minor thing. No, it's a major thing, especially in the first trimester. You can't have morning sickness. You need all that nutrition, proper hydration to get the baby off on a proper foundation. So, no, you can't accept morning sickness. So, all of you motherfuckers, that makes you evil when you accept it. That's why it's excellence before God. It's never accepting it. So, think of it as your baby. And would you do that to your baby? And if you do, you have a serious issue. You're a failed human in that sense. And you shouldn't be having a child. So, again, it doesn't work that way. And you're supposed to be looking to treat these things. So Politicians, they don't have to be experts on these things. Go into the doctor's office as a politician. You get checkups and see, how do they treat you? This is, a prosecutor goes in for health care. Police officers go in for physicals. And they can make mental notes, and they can say, hey, I noticed that my physician is doing this and that, and it's not to hurt them, but say it to the people that it's their job to go in and correct them. And what did the Surgeon General do in that? So they work through their advocates, and they say, okay, we need to go into doctors' offices or into medical schools. This is how the bedside thing they started teaching at medical schools. How doctors can show empathy. Sympathy is feeling with. Empathy is putting yourself in their shoes. Sympathy is understanding their feelings. Empathy is you're feeling their feelings, meaning you're not just understanding it. That's why empathy is the utmost in compassion. Sympathy is what doctors need to underdo to understand things to be more clinical. Sympathy is clinical. Empathy is compassion. So they need both sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is to understand the feelings. So you need to have a therapist that sympathizes, that can understand the feelings, and then sometimes you need that therapist to empathize, to have compassion for your situation, and step out of the clinical shoes and have bedside manner. That's what my therapist did when I was leaving. He stayed sympathetic, seeking to understand, but at the end, when he gave me the assessment with our last meeting, and he said to me just before I was leaving, he said, I want to leave you with this. And he said, your ex-girlfriend screwed you over. Your family screwed you over. Your workplace screwed you over. Yes, charity screwed you over. The community screwed you over. The government screwed you over. It's not your fault. They all failed you. You didn't fail them. And it was like Good Will Hunting when he says to Will, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And Will breaks down and starts crying. That's how God sees it with me. It's not my fault. But you constantly go out to make it my fault. That makes you incredibly fucking evil. It's never been my fault. I do everything possible since I've been a small child, sitting there watching over my parents around the curves of the step. Not my brothers and sisters, not my brothers or sister, but me, spending all the time with my father, all the time with my mother, trying to create stability, trying to help their problem go away. And that positively, yes, ultimately positively affecting me, but it would affect my brother positively, my other brother positively, my other brother positively, my sister positively. And I took it on my chin all by myself, constantly. And you keep on blaming me and kicking me out and pushing me around and giving me more pain and suffering. It's fucking sickening. It makes you some seriously sick people. And then I show you how underperforming America is doing to Japan. We didn't have the bombings and nuclear bombs dropped on us or anything else. Yes, they failed with their corruption, and that destroyed them. And they fell greatly from number 2, where they were challenging us for number 1. At 1/3 of the population, they were challenging us. We're 2/3 larger than them, and they were challenging us for number 1. So you think America's good? America is so underperformed, so sick, it is unfucking believable. So I show you these things, and you go and torture me. That makes you even sicker. And any politician, I show the crime rates. Americans didn't know the clearance rate of Japan for murder. And the reason we had thousands and thousands of serial killers, and they don't, is 90+% of anyone who commits murder, even the Yakuza knows this, they go to jail. We get the Italian mafia and all that, and all these criminal organizations, the cartels and that kill people, and they get away with it. Not even the Yakuza got away with murder. So they ended up in jail. So we have a serious fucking problem where people are getting incredibly slaughtered. And you think things have been successful. I see it the opposite. I see how underperformed our society is and how sick it is. Unfucking believably sick. I see it different than you. You see it as healthy and functional. I see it as incredibly sick and not properly functioning. So I grew up with John Wayne Gacy, and I still remember kids in my neighborhood disappearing. And I always thought that I could have worked for him, and thank God I didn't. But that was a white neighborhood. Those were all white kids. And then take the serial killer, who was another white area, and these were white females, and he killed like 50 of them. They just disappeared. And these are white neighborhoods. So when they say it's racism, I don't see that, because those serial killers were feeding off of white neighborhoods. And they weren't getting caught. So it's the failure of the government. It didn't matter your skin color. And they keep on saying it's skin color, and no, it's not. So when you grow up with these people, like Ted Bundy, the majority of the women he killed were white. And again, it's easier for these evil people, and this is why the Bible talks about the wolf in sheep's clothing, because it's easier for them to come like you. And you think tribal things are bad. tribal things aren't necessarily bad. Where you say, oh, that's racism and that's... But the thing is, it creates a weeding out. And it makes them harder for, if we didn't have that natural bias, Ted Bundy and others, and I'm using them, but there are serial killers and they could have crossed easily through the communities because you didn't have the prejudice. And so they could have moved easily. Like Jeffrey Dahmer, because the LGBTQ, they don't want to be discriminatory. Well, what happens? All those black people went missing because their community, that's why they got the pulse for the Muslim, because their community didn't want to be discriminatory, meaning run them up the totem pole. I'm saying you have your internal, but you don't want your external, because if that breaks down too, and this is why I hate lawyers, and they need to do a better job, and all I'm talking about is educating lawyers more correctly. What is a barrier that needs to stay in place compared to a barrier that we really need to tear down? There is natural protections for all communities, so you have to worry about the internal, and you can focus on the internal. But I thank God for John Wayne Gacy and that not being able to cross racial lines, and it was easier for him to get caught, even as dysfunctional as the system was, because they should have been filling out tax forms. That's why I said you can't have sweatshops or illegal labor under the table stuff, and that's why they took prostitution and they killed them. But if it was institutionalized and they had to fill out things and people had to pay and that client was recognized, like the girl who was here in, that everybody liked in the Gold Coast. And she was an escort, and she lived at, I think, Newberry. And that she ended up getting killed. And the person thought they'd get away with it because they didn't know they were there. But if you have to register going into a building, and when you leave, and they know your presence, and you think, oh, this is new. But if you knew me from when I worked at Platinum and that, there's a front desk and you got to sign in. And I would go and sign in and look if anyone's in the office. So when I go up, it's not because I was trying to hide anything, but I wanted to know if I get started. And then I go in and there's John at the desk. Or not very rarely, but sometimes. And I go up and I'm like, you didn't sign in. And I said, what happens if there's an active shooter or a fire or you have a heart attack or anything along those lines, that the janitorial staff can come into the office and they can do well-being checks. If the janitor is allowed into the office, the security guard should be, for the building, allowed into the office. They allowed the janitorial staff to walk through. And I said, one point of having a security guard at the firm is they should be able to walk through the offices. But you have to have a high trust. We trust the janitors, and they go through and they see paperwork. And we are told to take all of our files off a desk and lock them up. And, you're supposed to passcode your computer and everything. And any files on the desk are supposed to be locked up at night. So you're not supposed to leave any client information out. Do you know that's protocol in the securities industry? You have to have filing cabinets with locks, and you're not, when you go home, every client file is supposed to be locked up at night, so you don't leave it out there for the janitorial staff. And then on those lockers, you can put locks. Like we had to fire our night cleaning crew. At Baja, the bartenders cleaned all the bars and everything, and then put the covers on everything and corked off the spouts and everything and so on. And then the janitorial crew came in and cleaned, but we found out they were drinking beers, truly, because the roll tops weren't closed and that, and they were drinking liquor, and it took a while. We couldn't figure out where it came from, and then we noticed that it was them, because we had to back into it, and then we fired them. But they were pouring themselves drinks, beers, drinks, popping bottles, you name it, the cleaning crew, because our stuff didn't lock up. So you can create, instead of those rubber things that go on top of the bottle, a locking cap for all the uncorked wine in that. In the coolers, you can lock them, but even when you put them in, you got to put a cap to stop evaporation. So when you put those plastic pourers that you put the juices in that, you're supposed to put a cap in, and you can use the pump like they did with our wines that vacuum out the bottle. Then you put the cork in, but it can be a locking system. So it goes on, and all those bottles are locked that are on the shelf. All the liquor bottles, it not only covers the bottle, but it also locks the bottle, and it can have a vacuum where it doesn't allow air in, period, and it can be more preservative for the liquor, and then people can't drink it. And then the roll tops and that slide open, you can turn a key and lock them, so when your cleaning crew comes in, they can't pilfer, because you're going to notice a bottle's missing. But you don't weigh stuff, or the taps, you don't know, and the taps, you can put a little spigot on the bottom of the tap that goes up and locks. And so they're not in the tappet because you have the lock on the bottom. And they can't take it off. And I consider these things a nice way to say no. So you think I'm against these things? No. I'm against allowing for temptation. They used to have chastity belts, so guys wouldn't think they could, rape the girl. And yes, it allowed them to go to the bathroom, and it had these iron teeth, and so you can stick anything in there. And it allowed them to go pee, but you got to clean it. But the point of it, they were thinking of solutions to protect women against predatory men, especially back then. And you think these things are harsh, but they're not. So we have to have laws that are better discerning between natural protections than what we consider racism. And I told you, you recognize color, you weed them out, and this is a natural protection that we don't allow black scammers to come into white communities or white scammers to come into black communities. So there's a natural discrimination. And it's a safety mechanism that creates check and balance. You cannot be colorblind. So that is absolutely wrong. And you shouldn't feel negative about being discriminatory. It is a natural protection. And when that natural protection breaks down, society is worse off. There is no such thing as colorblind. So you don't have to feel bad about feeling discriminatory. It's what you do with the information that matters. And you're not supposed to suppress your natural instinct. You're supposed to harness it, and then with mentoring, create proper natural instincts with guidance. So these things are not evil. They're not bad. As Malcolm Gladwell pointed them out, but he kept on pointing them out as their biases. But biases aren't bad. There are forms of protection that allow bad actors more gates to go through to create it. So it isolates them, and when it isolates them, it makes them easier to catch. But if you move around, and this is why Europe's had serious problems, because they can move around from country to country without borders. And so they've had this incredible rate of terrorism, and it's unbelievable because they can move from Sweden to others. You don't need a passport. You don't need a visa. There's no screening. And if you want to move from Germany to France, you got to go through the visa system. But once approved, you're a TSA person. But they watch you through the TSA. They're monitored to be on that list. They constantly monitor your background in that. So initially, you got to jump through hoops. But once you clear the hoops, things move very quickly. Jen used to do it. She was pre-screened, and she would check in on the plane at home and print off her boarding pass, and she would do a carry-on, and she flew and walked right through the airport. Very easy, very fast and efficient. But to get on it, you got to jump through some hoops. And so I said, no one should be around me that's not allowed to be around me. Yeah. The only thing I worry about is the open canisters and all the insects in that. But better to puke in the trash can than on the sidewalk. Truly. Less to feed off for insects, and insects bring rodents, and that's why pissing and urine and throwing up, it brings feed. Your waste is another insect's treasure, and an insect is feed for rodents. And so you get the insects, you get the rodents. You get rid of the insects, you get rid of the rodents. So again, one person's trash is another species' treasure. Truly, look at dung of elephants, and you get horse flies and so on. So one person's trash is another species' treasure. And if you put it in the right places, you don't run into the problems. So we have to perfect our legal system between what is discriminatory and what is natural protection. Where people have to understand on both sides, you're going to have to go through a little bit of, how do you say, weeding out? And so we break it down with sanctuary cities and that, and they don't have to go through the weeding out and then a community, and you think it's... But what do you think when it's shoved down your throat and you have no say-so because industries wanted cheap labor, and one of them was hospitality? It benefited incredibly from all the cheap labor from Hispanics. And it wasn't helping them, it was hurting them. There was no... And so you think I was racist at Charlie's. The Hispanic kid, who was a great busboy, couldn't speak English well, dated a white girl, and she said, I want him to become a waiter. And I said, fine, teach them English. You care about them that greatly. You want them the position. My clients are not going to suffer. I'm not going to make them a waiter, and then my clients are going to have to struggle to communicate with him. I said, no way. I said, if you teach him English and he comes proficient, he's a great busboy. I'll make him a waiter instantly. But I'm not going to sacrifice my clients and use them as a guinea pig coming into my place, and I'm going to get less satisfaction, and my numbers are going down, and I have to drive business to your pocketbook. And I explained this to her at Charlie's, and she's like, that's fine. I'll teach them English. But, eventually I got fired, so I don't know what happened. I can't give you the rest of the story. I truly don't know what's happened. I lost contact with them. So, but the whole point is, I'm not going to make my clients guinea pigs. And so you buy something, you're not supposed to be the guinea pig. That's why law firms can sue when products fail. The client is not supposed to be the guinea pig. They're supposed to be the beneficiary of the product. Why do you think FDA has drug trials? Those people get monitored unbelievably well, and I try to perfect that monitoring, even making it incredibly better, so they can monitor what's going on more precisely, trying to take the guinea pig out of them as well. But once it leaves them, you're not supposed to be a guinea pig anymore. It approved FDA trials. It's supposed to work. It's no more guinea pig. I'm paying for shit that works. And when it doesn't work, the system fails. Because now the general public, which we try to protect the general public from being guinea pigs, so we get these groups, and they're highly vetted, and they're supposed to be watched over immensely, protecting them from any harm. And if you read the trials, they pull them off of immediately. When they spot a side effect in that, they have to watch, and it has to go through a systematic calculation. And if it starts doing what they perceive, and you have to project this out, you have to project out rates of growth and everything to see if you need to remove them, or is the benefit still positive, and this is a minor irritation solving a more major life-threatening, and so the drug minimizes the big problem, and you're left with a little problem that I'll take the minor, like a little bit of ringing in my ears, very minor, to it screaming. And when all these things I take say they reduce the effects of tinnitus, and none of them work, that is a fucked up system. That means I'm being scammed. And I'm not supposed to be scammed. I didn't sign, and you get paid very well to be part of a drug thing. You get paid incredibly well. And they got doctors checking on you all the fucking time, because they know it's not tested. And so your monitoring is incredibly intense. They monitor in real time what the fuck is going on. Now with wearables and that, they can monitor in real time what is exactly going on with you. My client, and I helped them, they hooked up a monitor at home so his wife could be monitored by the cardiologist and electrocardiologist and cardiologist in real time. She was being monitored and watched 24/7 basically, and the system is supposed to have alerts. So the cardiologist, part of it is you're going to have to wake up in the middle of the night. Unless you can hand off to another electrical cardiologist. And that's why I said, firefighters, this fucking sleeping gotta go away. You gotta do 8-hour shifts, and they need to be active, and they need to be out in the community in that, in a way. Truly, I understand being a firehouse and centrally dispatched, but they need to be able to do building inspections in that. And so they need to take the fire trucks out of the firehouse, but they can't leave the radius of the area they're protecting. So they get their fiefdom, like the patrolled area, like the police, so do the firefighters. They don't need to sit in the firehouse. They're supposed to be out and they can be inspecting buildings. Yeah, paramedics and that, as long as they stay in the vicinity, they don't need to stay in the firehouse. They got a lot of work to do. And you put it in 3 8-hour shifts, or 2 12-hour shifts, and they're out there inspecting. That's what I wrote about firefighters and that. And so you got police out, the firefighters are doing that, and then they feed into the zoning commissions and that. They tell them, we've seen this sprinkler system. They got to go into buildings and test sprinkler systems. You got to put on the little bucket, and then you got to test one of the sprinkler heads and see if the system works correctly. So just like they test fire hydrants, they got to test sprinkler systems. So they got to be recertified. And you can just put a clear bucket over it and look at the water, how the water came out. And you got to watch the nozzles and make sure the nozzles aren't clogged on the sprinkler head, so it's dispersing the water correctly. So again, they have to test Trump Towers and all that. And then scenarios where if the pipes break, what happens? Truly, if you have pipes burst, like in the winter, you can't have water pipes burst. Like at Trump Tower and that, all of a sudden the sprinkler systems are tied to the same drinking water lines and that. Then you have a water pressure problem. Flushing toilets and everything else diverts water. Other floors, there's a fire, and now they're flushing toilets and doing things, and you have a water pressure. So that means you have to have a booster pump that makes it off. But when there's a fire, you got to tell them you can't shower or turn on any water in the building. So again, they have to figure these scenarios out. What happens? What do you think they put the water tanks on the roof and the MGM? Not only did they have it coming from the ground, but they had backup tanks on the roof. They didn't have that in 9/11. And those upper floors were cut off from the water pipes because the plane went through the building, breaking the feeds. So the upper floors, they couldn't resist the heat. But if they had the tanks on the upper floors, even if you get cut off at a floor, you get the bottom feed to a certain level, and then you get the top down to a certain level. At least it's boxed in. So we have to think about these things, that maybe water tanks on the roof should come back in. And to make it more effective, we add in foam into the sprinkler systems So it doesn't need as much water because foam doesn't absorb and it stays on top. Like in my shower, you ever shower and you wash your hair and then the foam hits the drain and it clogs the drain and the water can't get into the drain and it starts filling up in the shower. So you break down the foam, and once the foam's gone, it starts going down the drain smoothly. Well, that's what happens. So now you move the foam. So you take a little bit of water, it hits the foam, and it creates a layer. So you don't need as heavy water tanks on the roof. So you can't use pure water anymore. You need to move to foam. But that also minimizes water damage because you don't need as much water, so you don't get water damage, and it's easier to clean up and restore. So those groups, instead of having to wipe out whole floors and that, then you use those firms that come in and do the cleanup, and they get shitloads of business, and you're not putting construction workers into constant demolition and repair existing structures, and you can work on improving others because you got more labor, and now you're not short of labor. But if you got people recreating the wheel, like roadways and that, you think I'm wrong? No. You're dedicating more and more people to a maintenance loop. You're supposed to do preventive maintenance, so you don't need as many people in the maintenance loop. And that means they can do other roadways, they can work on bridges, and you start minimizing your labor shortage. And every country in the world needs to figure this out, but this is where Deloitte and KPMG and McKinsey and other consulting firms, how to solve China's labor shortage. And you say, well, we don't have the technology. That's fine. We can solve labor shortages in creating efficiencies, doing more with less. China has a massive labor shortage. India actually has a labor shortage. And that's 3 billion people, and those countries have labor shortages. So you think it's good to have these people that are shitty, and I disagree. It's excellence before God. And anything other than that is blasphemy. So you have to overemploy in a field, and every field is now starving every other field, and it stifles growth. But if you create efficiencies, then you minimize the shortage, and fields can grow. And that takes pressure off of women with how many children they need to have. And so 3 children is a good level. That creates a little bit of growth. And even if lots of women just have 2 children, replacement rate. Some have 3, some have 2, and now you have a nice baseline, and you're not overtaxing families with lots of children, and those families can now focus, and you don't need, because what happens, they could have given their kids more attention, but having 8 kids, there's a lot of attention deficit. And we have a society that happens that in these bigger families, you get incredible attention deficit. So instead, you have 2, and you look at the numbers 2 to 3, and some can have 1, but 1 should be the minimum. And so if you have enough 3, you have nice growth, and it makes up for those single family children. And so the government has to figure this out and how to balance this out. So again, and then there's going to be those that have 0, and they're going to adopt right? Or foster. So they fill in it through adoption and fostering. So not everybody has to have children. They absorb those children. So you can work with an orphanage too. But you have to figure out the systems to make things fair for men and women when they get into these things. How much obligation do they want to bring on? And so China needs to focus on that so they can stabilize their population. Because everybody didn't want to move past one child, and it's going to cause an incredible collapse. So they have to figure this out. So this creates fairness for both men and women, because you think, oh, it's only on women. No, because they're supposed to have a husband. At least with, and you say, oh, Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell aren't married. No, they're married. You ever heard of statutory marriage in California? Watch the one movie. They're married. They didn't need to go through a formal marriage. Eventually, the state made them married because they were together for a certain period. They ended up statutory marriage. So that you say, oh, they're married. They didn't choose, the state chose for them. And I believe in that. I do believe in statutory marriage. After a period of time, this makes people make decisions that they think, well, I need to cut you loose, or you need to cut me loose, or we need to cut each other loose because this isn't working out. But it comes to that come to Jesus moment where you're going to have to make a decision and let that person go. So I believe in it. I believe it forces that decision. And people now are with, and that's why it worked out that way. They know that, Kurt Russell and Goldie. And they were okay with it. They're married. So they wanted to do it that way. That's fine. So you don't have to have a big wedding or anything. You're literally eloping. The state just did it for you. And Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell can have a marriage after you become statutory married. And they should. This is an industry in these states that can boom. Now, why don't you have a wedding? Because by state, you're already married. So let's do it through the church and that, and just go through the sermon and that, and have a wedding. Or you have an anniversary. Your statutory marriage date is your anniversary. So you do have a wedding anniversary, and it's your statutory marriage. And so that's a whole industry that's waiting there that's never been tapped into. So you don't need these things. Certain things. Anyways, but that's a whole industry that's waiting to be tapped into. And they still need estate planning in that, because once you become statutory married, it changes the dynamics and you need to adjust your estate planning. So I don't know if Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell adjusted their estate plans that account for their statutorily married. So again, that's a whole industry, and they have an anniversary date, and they can celebrate their wedding anniversary. And so they have the anniversary date of when they met as well. your first date anniversary, and then when you become a couple, like me and Jen, I don't remember the date. She does. She has it in her diary. But when we officially, when I said I loved her, and we officially became this, formally closed at not the Green Dolphin, but Bar Louie. And I forget what day that was. But those are anniversaries of moments in your life that you should remember and celebrate. These are things that, are moments that change your life forever. And so those are things like when you're creating these things, these are things you naturally have celebrations for, like birthdays. And these make life special. That you naturally have these times that you celebrate. What are weekends about? Working for the weekend. And hump day, like the commercial, Mike, what day is it, Mike? What day is it? And then the Geico commercial, it's hump day, and they have the camel, and he has humps, so it's ironic and funny, smart commercial. But Wednesday night was a good night out for a happy hour in that. Truly, Wednesday night was a great happy hour because it was hump day. And what were people acknowledging? The weekend was coming. And what do you do on the weekend? You celebrate the weekend. That's what about going out on Friday and Saturday and that is. It's about celebrating your days of rest, your weekends. And that's why we go out on Fridays, Saturdays, and then Sundays is more, morning and afternoon, and then night, is more low-keyed. But this is working for the weekend. So they need to teach financial literacy, that you earn your right to party, like the Beastie Boys say. And so you work for the week and you earn your right to go out on the weekends. So it's not given to you, you earn it. So you put in your work Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday, and you earned your right to go out on the weekend. Hospitality people have Sunday night usually, and Monday and Tuesday, depending on when you're off, you get one of those or two of those days. It's a reverse weekend, and that's why they hang out in certain places, because there's less of them. And so they have sin night at certain places, service industry night. And so they do it Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And there are only certain places because there's not enough. And so certain places focus on sin night. So they give up the weekends as their big day. Truly, they do. And they focus more on catering to the general service industry, and their busy days are Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. That's the weekend for hospitality. And so those do it the reverse. It's a smaller crowd, so there's fewer of them, and so you only had a few places that did service industry night. And because there's only a few of them, you could get a big enough crowd to make it worth your while to do it. And so you have a different type of thing. So I used to say Chicago was the biggest, smallest service industry because we had a lot of SIN nights, service industry nights, and that made the service community know each other easier because it's a smaller amount of people than the Monday through Friday, which is the largest amount of the workforce. And so it was easier to know everybody in that way because, there's only a few places that do these service industry nights or SIN nights. It's the good thing, not the bad thing. And so it's easier to get to know people in your industry. And so you have to have these places that focus on that. And that's where the Chicago Restaurant Association and Chicago Bar Association, you get licenses to have SIN nights. Truly, they can make it a licensed thing that you are now allowed to have this service industry focus. And so you have to qualify for the license, and they don't give out too many of them, and it's spread out by geographical region. And this allows service industry people to go out and meet other people in the industry and hang out and have a good time, and it further propels the service industry. They have to have their nights where they have their fun. And what happens? It's good across the board because everybody has their niche, and it creates fairness, and it creates a desire to be in different industries. And now people have the choice of which industry they want to go in, and they don't have to feel like I'm giving up everything, as people felt like in the hospitality. I'm giving up my weekend, and I work every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I give up my weekends, and I miss out on everything. So you don't get that, and people want to stay in the industry. Because they can make friends. And so I don't pay attention to the black people anymore. There's more than enough groups, and they've been preaching forever. They need to take care of their shit. So, like I said, I'm done with that. That's on them. So again, it's like we used to hang out with the police. They're in the service industry. You know that, right? Firefighters are a little different. But police are in the service industry, and we used to hang out at Mike's the Cop Bar and other places. I hung out with a bunch of cops because they tend to be in the service industry. Their busy days tend to be, on weekends and that. And again, late Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday tends to be their weekends. And so, yeah, dating people in the hospitality industry would work perfect for cops, because they would tend to have off the same days that Monday, Tuesday, that Sunday night, Monday and Tuesday tend to be slower. And so they tend to, more paramedics, it's the same thing. The busier is on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so you have service industry night, and these people work in the service industry. So again, you figure this out, and you have these places, like we used to go to the Mike's the Cop Bar, all of us in the service industry, because they had the same nights off. So I don't get any of this. It just makes black people look like shit. You don't see Asians doing this, and you got some whites, and you don't see many Hispanics doing this. So you think this is good in the movie. You're telling the world you people are pieces of fucking shit. And so they hear that and see that in the back of their minds. I'm not doing business with black people. They're fucking homeless fucking pieces of garbage. I'm sorry, you reap what you sow. So if black people think they're winning, why do you think the Asian group moved to number one? Because how many Asians do you see in a negative light? How many Asians do you see in prison? How many Asian homeless people? I've actually, in all the homeless shelters I've worked in, I've never run into an Asian homeless person. Ever. Ever. And so people look at this, and they look at your society, and they're making a judgment of who they want to do business with. And so you have a serious public relations issue. So go with the movies and that. That's fine. People see you as scumbags. What do you think Italians did with the mafia and that? They had a problem getting business. It really hurt Italians. It hurt the Russians. Because people were more highly discriminatory, because they didn't want you around, because they didn't want to deal with an Italian mafiosa or a Russian mafiosa or a Yakuza or something. So they're very discriminating to protect themselves, but naturally, rightfully so. So it really dampened Italian food in that. Oh, yeah. It hurt their abilities to get other people from outside. The places that made it weren't the small mom and pops. They suffered immensely because it's a Goomba. You know what made it was Domino's and Papa John's. That's when Italian food became number one, because they didn't have to worry when they ordered. They're not dealing with a Goomba. And so all those mom and pops suffered from incredible, truly, people didn't want to go to them. Who wants to deal with, like, I'm going to go here and some hitman's going to come into the fucking Italian restaurant? So all the small businesses suffered immensely, unfucking believably. And it pushed all the business into the Domino's and Papa John's of the world and the Pizza Huts. Why do you think they grew, and they grew across everywhere? Because people knew what they were going to receive, and they knew they weren't dealing with shitbags. So driving around Chicago, they're fucking black people throughout the United States. They are. They're showing there's fucking shitbag pieces of low-life fucking trash. So you reap what you sow. So no one wants to go over there to the black community with restaurants, and that's why they don't have them. So make no mistake about it. You got to get up to the big celebrity levels of a Shaq or somebody to get any respect. So people don't respect black people. but rightfully so. So you don't understand. It hurts the little guy who is not the big celebrity like Shaq or Michael Jordan. They get the respect because everybody can see their work. And so they give them the grace because of their good works. That's why they get the respect. Everybody can see them on the court. Look at smaller players that aren't as good. I've been around them that most people don't even know them. Even when they play on the Chicago Bulls, most people don't pay attention to them and recognize them as much when they're out. But when they're more like Yannick Noah was more recognized when he was out, but Derrick Rose much more so. But then he represented wrong, and that did seriously. And so that took a damage to their reputation. So the little guy, like I'm seeing this black guy walk down the street, and you think it's racist. No, people look at these and they take it in and they calculate. In the back of the mind, remember, it's filling the gaps in the subconscious, and it's calculating, do I really want to do business with you? Because I drive around and see your crazy people and see your homeless people and so on, and nah, I don't want to go. And they don't gravitate to your community. They don't gravitate to your community. It happens to any community, the Appalachians in that. You watch Deliverance and that, and people don't want to invest in those communities. They're looking at the community and seeing, is there good things going on? And when they see these things, they're like, no, I'm not. And this is why you get ghettos and everything else. And they're making a judgment call, and they want stability. They want predictability. They want to know if they give you money that they're going to make money on that money. And make no mistake about it, charities need to make money. So again, you don't escape it. So charities are not non-profits. They need profits. I've been around a lot of charitable workers. They like their benefits. They want their 401k or 403b. They like their pay. They like their houses, and they like to go out for a good meal. So missionaries make it because a lot of people pick up the tabs for them. And you don't know how it works, but they do. So like Simon used to have missionaries come and they stay with him, and then they go out to eat and he picks up the bill. And they make it by other people doing goodwill to them. So they don't need as much pay, but make no mistake about it, they're living a really good life and they get respected extremely well. You say you're a missionary and people have high respect for you, high regards for you. So it comes with a lot of esteem and people looking at you in a very good light. So make no mistake, that adds up into payment. The social tax, well, it's a positive that you're receiving, and it is a tax on society. It's called goodwill, and it is a social tax, and they're giving it to you. What do you think pastors and priests get? They get a lot of social tax, a lot of positive goodwill. Like when Brad went out for I took him out to a steakhouse down here, and I wanted to say goodbye to him, and I took him to a very nice steakhouse, and we had dinner and so on, and I had a couple questions I wanted to ask him, and I wanted to say goodbye, and so I pick up the tab. The bill's a few $100, and That's goodwill. And so I picked up the bill. They get these goodwill gestures, and when they go to places like Joe Osteen, oh, that's Pastor Osteen, and they think very well of them, and they get all this community goodwill. Why do you think people like wearing the collars? But also, you get the wolves and in there that want to do this, and they'll go through all of that, because once they get the collar, they get the instant goodwill. And that's where you got the pedophile priest and all that clergy, and truly going back could be unbelievably evil. And so they'll go through all that. They're not believers. They just want the esteem. They just want the collar. And so they have to be very careful of who they give a collar to, who they call a priest and pastor. So I don't get it with the black community, and that's why I bring up, and I didn't know Thomas, the economist. Pete did. And we used to have a lot of economic talks. His father was an incredible fund manager. And his father didn't mentor Pete to become him. And I don't understand why Pete loves investing in everything. And he could have been, and his father ran a family office for a family in Indiana that was multi-billions of dollars. And so, okay. And I helped him out with many things with the casinos and other investments they had in the Canary Islands, and then they owned a casino in Indiana. But the thing is, Pete could have stepped right in and took over the family office when his father stepped down. He could have mentored his son to fill in the shoes. That's what Pete loves. He used to be a trader on the floor. It didn't work out. Then he went into insurance, and he has this, and he does day trade with options and everything. He has a lot of experience, but his father didn't mentor him. And it's not because his father didn't want to. It's because he didn't think of mentoring him. He didn't think about his legacy. And when people think about their legacy, then they think about, oh yeah, like Steve Jobs never thought about, well, what happens after me? And so you have to put that early on. When they become the CEO, immediately you have to plan these exit strategies. You can't wait. Once they get hired, that planning just starts. It's not intense or anything. It's very slow, but you start weeding through the candidates. So when you hire a coach, like anything else, you always keep your short list. And as it moves on, up or down, you always have your short list, and it's in there in case that you have to make a decision, that you need to make a move. And that coach could go and become an assistant coach. Maybe they failed. Maybe you want to bring them down as a linebacker or quarterback or offensive or defensive coordinator, like Tony Dungy. He could have went down. Dave Wanstead was a defensive coordinator for Dallas, and that he could have went back. He went to college at Pittsburgh. He was really good there as a head coach. So again, you have to have your short list, and it starts right away when you hire. So it's like positions. You always have to have your short list. So again, you have your short list. So for quarterbacks and that, you have your backups in that, and you're working on them, but you always keep a short list just in case. that you need to make pivots. And the short list is also where you can get rid of them. Where can I offload my second string? Or where can I offload my first string quarterback if I have to make a move? So it's not only replacing them, it's your exit strategy of where you can put them to, and you always work the list. That's what Billy Ball was taking. All their players, they were working the list, who they can get and who they can trade. And so they always worked it. If they needed to make moves, they know, okay, I can trade this person to this team and that person to that team. And they were refining it with the computer guy who did statistics. He was taking his intellectual capital, and that kid grew up loving baseball. He was just a baseball geek. He wasn't a player. He admired their skill and everything. And he was just a huge sports fan that went to school for computers and statistics. And then got in and had great insight. So he was a couch potato, but he was a very educated couch potato. Like my friend Brian Donnelly, he used to use spreadsheets and that for winning pools on games. And he would download and spreadsheet. Now he's a high-speed trading firm he runs. And he played baseball in college at a small college, Denison. But he would spreadsheet all the athletes up and down and have all the different categories and do all the statistical. So he would play in these pools and win. It was all for fun, but it helped him sharpen his skills for trading. So again, his hobby helped make his true job better. And he brought all that skill to his hobby and was very good at it. So again, you have to understand these things. And I don't think leadership in the black community really understand what they're doing, and other communities don't understand why things aren't quite working, because you are setting a perception of how people will interact with you. And it's true. Why gangbangers and all that? When you get that and you move in that manner, well, people know that you're a person I don't want to do business with. And so all of a sudden you limit your market, and you're like, they're so discriminatory and everything. Why do you think at Arthur Andersen, when David got hired, they took him to etiquette classes? At old Arthur Andersen, when it was, at one time it was considered number one, anyone who was hired had to go to etiquette class. And David said they taught him how to, do fine dining, how to talk at a table, what's appropriate, what isn't appropriate, because they're going to be in the office of clients, and they're going to be eating with clients at times, and they had to have the proper etiquette. And so they would mentor them, and that's how they were number one. And it was great competition between the Big Five. It was at times, not Big Four, Big Five. And they competed fiercely with each other. And they were always trying to figure out how they could be number one. And so now this white guy in the middle of the street, now white people look like fucking crap. So he's telling me that I don't want to invest in white people. Truly. What do serial killers and all that? It sets a precedent that you can't be trusted. And I always thought of them as pieces of shit. That's why we have urban ministry in that. They want to put all their shit on display. And now they want to tell the world they're pieces of fucking garbage. They could go into urban ministry in Pacific Gardens, out of sight, out of mind, and then they could get their rehabilitation and everything, and no one sees them, their ass. And now they get rehab, they go through it, and they can say, hey, I went through a time of turbulence, and I went here and there, and I'm going to think good of you because you tackled your issue. You went and said, I had this problem, and I did this, and I overcame this. And it made me smarter and stronger and better. And you're like, wow, you acknowledged your problems, you overcame your problems. That shows you're very resourceful. And you're willing to commit to something and stay in a program, and you show integrity by staying with AA in that, and you show them your chip 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. That shows you have great integrity. But I believe they should breathalyze and test people. Truly, I don't believe they should give chips without testing. I think AA needs to move out of naivety, and they need to move into a way of testing. So does NA and everything else, that eventually you'll have to submit to a test. Like every 3 months, give a strand of hair. It's a simple test, and they're dirt cheap. Truly. Because you got to bring up the legitimacy of the chip. Because there's a lot of people that go out, they get, and they're like, and falling off the wagon, and you got to start from zero again, and you take out that chip, and you're like, fucking, I'm going to have this, and then I'm going to lose 10 years? Fuck that shit. But that's what they're supposed to teach them. Every time you get an urge, think of how much time you spent winning, not giving in. Pull out that chip. Give it to pedophiles. That's why I say the chip works. How long you've been able to stay clean. It is a very powerful tool that they don't use. Come out with something else then. You don't need a chip then. Come out with something else, but this is why you do anniversaries and that. Remembering why. Anniversaries, wedding anniversaries and that. You're supposed to remember why you got into it. See, they just think it's a celebration. No, it's supposed to go back to why you meant, why you fell in love. And each anniversary is supposed to be a reminder of that, and you got to go back to that original love. Seeking, or like they say in heroin, chasing the dragon. Well, you're chasing the goodness. And remember, stay grounded in that goodness. Remembering, and then go over, the little things you've done for each other over the years. And how to keep that love fresh. That's what anniversaries and birthdays are supposed to do. You're supposed to look back on your accomplishments. And that's what that letter I published with Jen, the trials and triumphs and so on, looking over the past. And yeah, we had different challenges and we overcame them together. Yeah, now I want to cry. But the whole point is, these things are supposed to remind you. Scrapbooks, they're not just pictures. They're supposed to remind you of why you had a family. Hopefully it was through planning, but if it came about accidentally, so what? It's how you reacted to it. It mattered. And so that's a challenge. And I believe in churches are supposed to help with that, with ultrasounds and that, showing the baby, doing the planning, and I believe Planned Parenthood can work with churches. It's supposed to be Planned Parenthood. And so they go in and they give the ultrasounds and everything, and they say, okay, you're in this situation, you don't have, okay, well, there should be dating sites for pregnant women then. If the man abandoned them, truly, I would date a pregnant woman. So again, there should be dating sites and they can find somebody, but these have to be even more pre-vetted, that they want to date a pregnant woman, they want this type of relationship, they're looking for something permanent. Truly, they have to be looking for something permanent, and they're willing to take on an obligation like Joseph. What did he do? He dated a woman who was going to get pregnant from somebody else, and he was going to take care of the child and the wife and make the wife his own. So Joseph had lots of sex with Mary. And so God wanted it that way. So believe me, she didn't stay a virgin. And that was good for Jesus, that Mary and Joseph truly loved each other. So again, you can create a dating site, and that way, if these situations happen, then there's a solution they can turn to, and a support group and everything, and at least they can have that companionship, and they go out on dates and that. And so again, it's a good thing. So figuring out the solutions. Yeah, that's another solution, is not over serving people. Because they go into the grill and they have to deal with idiots. I didn't want to kick my can on everybody else by getting my people, the clients, drunk, and then they go out and they drive like idiots. They go into diners and they're idiots. They piss all over the fucking place. They can't hit the toilet. Truly. And they might be throwing up and that. I didn't dump my stuff. We didn't overserve people. I didn't have my people pissing on this, throwing up over there, because I respect the rest of the people. You work in the industry, the hospitality industry, and those people go to drive-thrus at McDonald's, or go into McDonald's, or go into burrito places and that, and I used to have to take care of Spatty, but I made sure that he wasn't a pig. I took a responsibility of a friend, and I made sure that, that things, and he's a very happy drunk. But I would clean up and make sure that things were respectable. That's why we have a designated driver in that, and you got to keep your people in check. If they're going to go off the reservation and get a little bit, too tipsy, like Jen on her birthday, I had to go pick her up, and, she was throwing up in the bathroom because she did too many shots too fast. And I had to pick her up and carry her from the bar, truly carry her, and then lay her down in the back of the car. And then I had to bring her up to our apartment. I had to clean her off. I had to put her in bed. And I had to take care of her. And I did that before when we first started dating. She gets a little bit overexcited, and she was having such a good time at the green tie ball and that, and then she did throw up, and I had to pull over and roll down the window, but I should have had a puke bag. So again, that you have to understand these things, and if you're going out, they should sell puke bags at bars and that, truly. And at restaurants, somebody gets sick at a restaurant and that, you don't want them. You can have them in bathrooms. My first experience with a puke bag was in 8th grade. I was flying to Washington, D.C., and we had turbulence, and this is at theme parks. It would have been nice getting off the roller coaster and there was a puke bag, and what happened, I'll give you that. But anyways, I read through everything, doing my due diligence when I got on the plane, and I picked out the bag, and I'm like, oh, and I read through it, and it's like, okay, if you get air sickness and so on, and they don't want people throwing up in the plane or throwing up on somebody. So I started getting sick, and I pulled the bag out, and then I vomited into the bag, and then I closed the bag up in that, and it was basically with landing, and I put it on my seat. I was waiting for a flight attendant to come by, but they didn't, and so I closed it up, I sealed it, and then I put it on my seat, and then I put the seatbelt around it. I did, not too tight, but enough. I didn't want the bag falling off the seat. So I actually snapped the seatbelt and squeezed it a little bit so the bag was perfectly placed, because I didn't want it, and I figured, you know, they're going to come back and clean the plane, and they'll see it on the seat, which there's no way they could miss it. It's right in the middle, with the, so easily seen. Yes, I'll have a hamburger. That'll be it. You got that?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. And so anyways, they have that. And so I think it should be common, like at the McDonald's bathroom, male and female, women get nausea in that, and you don't want to, but if they do, it's right there, instead of bending over the toilet.
Anything else? Okay, pull up to the first window. Hamburger, right?
Yep.
356. Okay, second window.
Yep. And you got to remember, it destroys the esophagus and destroys the enamel on the teeth. So what do you have to do if you throw up? You do have to rinse your mouth, and you do have to use enamel repair. Enamel repair. If you throw up, you need to rinse out everything. You can floss, and then you need to do enamel repair, and you need to rinse out right away and drink some water. Why? To get the acid out of the esophagus. It's not used to stomach acid. It burns the esophagus. So you need to drink something to flush the acid out of it.
Hamburger, right?
Yep, hamburger.
Cheeseburger, no cheese.
No cheese. Yep, no cheeseburger. That's Billy Goat's. Billy Goat Cafe, right? Cheeseburger.
Yeah.
No Coke, Pepsi. No Pepsi, Coke. That's what they have. Hamburger. No Pepsi, Coke. They can even say, proud sponsor of Coca-Cola. No Pepsi here. This is Coke's #1 partner, I think. McDonald's does well, so does Coke. So you think they do joint commercials at times. So. So no fun. And a cap, unlike beer, you can do that with beer. Have a cap for the glass, and you put it over to prevent the.
Thank you, man.
Take care, man. Prevent the carbonation from going away, like they do with sodas. The cap keeps the carbonation in. So it keeps it from going flat. And that way you don't have to over-carbonate your soda. But they don't have that for cans. And then somebody came out with, I think, a little rubber thing, maybe, that goes in. But I don't know. Because in soda, you have the straw, and it goes to the bottom, so carbonation doesn't go through. It sits above the straw. And only when you suck in does the carbonation come out. So it keeps it from going flat. So it lasts longer because of the cap. Because it fits tightly around the straw, preventing the carbonation from escaping. So again, they could offer that in a bar where you sell these little caps, and it prevents somebody from dosing the drink too. So you get these little caps, and you can put it over the drink. It like snaps on, and so you can plate glassware where you can give little caps. Now it sucks as a single person going to the movies, because you gotta leave your popcorn in that there, and you drink, and then you gotta, so how much are you gonna take to go to the bathroom? You're going to put on your coat. You're going to pick up your popcorn. You're going to pick up your soda. And you got to go. That's why going to the movies with two people, you can go to the bathrooms, and usually everybody does in the movies. One person stays, one person goes to the bathroom. And it's a good thing about going out, too. One person stays, the other person goes to the bathroom. And you just put your drink in front of you. So they go to the bathroom, you move over the drink, and you position it in front of you. That way, if you're talking to somebody or that, you can watch the drink simultaneously. But it's nice, husband and wife, you go out together, you got somebody who has your back. The great thing, it was so awesome being with Jen, is that I knew who I was going out with. And every weekend, I knew who I was interacting with and who I wanted to interact with. And yeah, she was out of town at times and I would have to figure out differently. But the majority of the time, she was in town, and it made things so easy. One thing is beneficial, and truly, who you're going to have sex with. It makes it easy. You don't have to worry. You can go out, have a good time. You don't have to worry about picking up a girl. It makes life simple. It takes pressure off. Truly. And you can go out and have a good time. And I did. I so much enjoyed it because I didn't have to worry about where I was going to get my nookie from. And I could go out and hang out with girls and be nothing but interested in them as friends. We could have meetings in the minds and talk and so on. And yeah, I would notice that they're wearing this nice or that, make compliments. I'm human. I recognize things, shape recognition and all that. But again, it wasn't to pick up. I'm like, oh, you look nice in that. The pants look nice on you. Or the top looks nice. Or I love how your hair is. Or the lipstick or makeup. Or I love the earrings. Or I love your watch. Or the shoes look awesome. Or, you know, you have a nice smile. But it wasn't a pickup line. But I never lie anyways, and I try to find something that's positive. And so, but the whole point is, it was nice. I just hang out, and you don't have to worry about that. All that pressure is gone. It's just like I get a girlfriend, and then I'm off the market. And things are decided. And everybody can move on because I'm spoken for, and it was supposed to be that way with Jen. I'm done. It's done. It's over. No more competition. It's all done. She was never supposed to leave me, and that's part of the problem. I was never supposed to be looking again. It was supposed to be over. God wants it to be over. God wants people to move on. It was never supposed to be at this point where I'm searching. It was supposed to be a done deal, like Jesus, like Mary with Joseph. She already found her husband. All other suitors, it was done. It was over. Joseph won. It was chosen already. So everybody else moved on. So again, it gives peace of mind and tranquility. It's done. Now you can focus on the next stage of life. So it's like the disciples, they recognize Jesus and it's done. It's him, and now they can move on. And Paul did his, John, Luke, Mark, all of them. Truly, they can do their own thing and focus on their own thing. They didn't have to worry about that. That's his job. I got to focus on my job. Yeah, Millennial Park. It was a nice offshoot with Maggie Daley Park and attaching them in Chicago. So you have to understand that it's nice. Like Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn, ask him about the peace of mind. It's done. The deal is done. And so he didn't have to worry. She didn't have to worry, you know? And so it made things so they can focus on their careers, and that's why they've had such great careers. Annette and Warren Beatty, it was done. They were off the market. So I don't get it. And they had great careers. So again, it's done. But they don't rub it in their face. Unlike you say, they don't sit there and stick it in your face. You know they're a couple and everything, but they're not out there like blasting it out. And they go places and you see them at this award show or that award show. But that's it. They're very low-key about their relationship. And that allows them to be more of a sex figure. So Brad Pitt was off the market. George Clooney's off the market. But they're low-key. They're not blasting it out there so women can think of like George Clooney as a sex figure. Yeah, John Cusack. Huh. What's he down here for? And John and Joan Cusack, big Chicago. So, how many white bums do you see in a movie? Truly. And then, of those, how many Asian bums? You don't see any Asian bums, do you? And I'm talking movies in the United States. So, yeah, you get the role, but also you get the perception in people's mind. Even if it is a movie, people still have that in the back of their mind, Asian bum. But I don't know any movies I've seen any Asian bums. So you can go these routes, but you stereotype John Travolta, Saturday Night Live, Saturday Night Fever and all that. He had a hard time getting roles because he was typecast. So you don't think you're typecasting your society? If you're going to do that, you have to show incredible good things on the backside. That's absolute fantasy. But it's not fantasy here in Chicago when you see the bums and the crazy people that are black on the street. Now the white bum. So you're deeply tying in the psychological connection. And that makes people perceive you as less than, and you are less than. And so, again, You say subhuman. So you reap what you sow. So if you think you're winning, I look at these perceptions of how these people did incredibly well. Do you see Jewish bums? Truly, I haven't run into a Jewish bum. So people respect these communities because of how they carry themselves. And so if you carry yourself like a ghetto piece of garbage, you're going to be treated like a ghetto piece of garbage. So again, why should you be expected anything but that? So if you want to be perceived differently, you dress for success, as we did with the young professionals and that. So you carry yourself in a dignified manner if you want to be treated with dignity. You're telling everybody to treat you like shit. And then you're telling them, don't give in to temptation. You must judge everybody fairly. Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? And so you're saying my spidey sense is off. So when I go see those cartel members in El Salvador, those gangbangers, I gotta let them in close and everything. I can't discriminate, and we can't hold them out, and we gotta let them in. Well, the Bible says the wolf in sheep's clothing. So now lawyers force you to be disarmed. As I told you about the black cab drivers, Arab cab drivers, and other minority cab drivers, and they were going down to the south side and getting robbed. So they stopped going down to the south side. And then they passed on picking up black people. And they said, that's racism. And so what did I watch the city do? Sue them and force them. And then what happened? They got more robberies and everything else. Truly, more negativity happened to them because they were trying to protect themselves, and it was trying to, like gangbanging. We had dress codes at the bars to protect ourselves. Because they were wearing those clothes to fit in with their people. And so when we outlawed all this gang stuff, and I did at Baja Net, that it kept all the gangbangers out. It kept the bad elements out. And we still had a problem with every single purse thief, and was a black person. And I advocated in that and created dress codes. And the purse thieves got in and they stole, I caught so many purse thieves, it's ridiculous. And every single one of them was a black person. Our black porters stole purses and threw them in the trash. And I didn't want to lock them up in that way and that, but they did it. They needed to go. I gave them every opportunity to go the other direction. I'm giving you every opportunity to make the right call. And God's watching. Will you do the right thing? So I didn't set them up. I treated them with dignity and absolute respect, and they still shit all over me. So, again, lawyers have to be very careful of what they consider racism or hate crimes. So you must have a process of delineation, of going through and separating. But don't tell me, if you, like the adage says, if you quack like a duck and you walk like a duck and you look like a duck, you're a duck. So again, it's for the police to deal with these things and get them help. They're crying out. They're standing right in front of them. And when they ignore the issue, in my church, as Julie Cho pointed out to me, she's like, here are the two social workers. They were part of our... They're the social workers, and they're not addressing the social issues in the church. And they were two white girls. And she's like, it's their responsibility. And I said, you're right. They're the social workers. They're supposed to be doing this shit. They sat on different things. One of them wanted to do the community garden and that. Well, they were supposed to be doing the social work. So again, that means police burn in hell. And that means the citizenry has to deal with the issues, and that's another social tax. That is another social tax. Instead of seeing and getting them the help they need, they ignore it, and then you get all these social problems. So if police were doing what they're supposed to be, like you see gangbanging in that, you know you have a problem, and you get them involved with social workers and therapists and job placement, and there's many other things. That's why I applauded New York City when they were doing this diversion program and knocking on the doors and like, we know you're involved in gangs and that, but we're going to give you an alternative. We'll help you out with your different issues. And that's what they said. It was a great program. And it was highly effective of keeping the kids out of gangs. So the cops, by default, became social workers. And do you know a cop should have a social worker degree? What do you think law enforcement is? They're social workers. They think they're supposed to use the gun and taser and that. That's all last alternatives. They need to be very proficient with them, but their job is social work. Domestic violence is a social call. Social working. And so when they don't do their job, the community fails. So we have to rethink law enforcement and what's their responsibility, as it says, to serve and protect, not to shoot and kill. But somehow they want to be like, get into violence and, oh, okay, well, that's adrenaline drunkies. I don't want an adrenaline drunkie. I want a cop who likes it nice and peace, like James Chisholm. He was a black cop who worked Oak Street, and he got to know, and he used to do a lot of intelligence. I used to talk to him, and he got to know all the merchants and what is normal, and he looked out for anything that was abnormal. So he constantly walked up and down Oak and Michigan Avenue there, and he knew all the players, and he was looking for things that weren't normal. He worked for me at Baja. I had Trish, Gil, Michael, and James, and they didn't want to get promoted. They liked being beat cops. You think everybody wants to move up the rank. They didn't. They made their money through private security and other things. They didn't need to make it by moving up the ranks. They had I'm with firefighters that love being a base fire. They don't want more responsibility. Why? Because they had plumbing companies, carpenter companies, all kinds of other money making that supplemented so they didn't want to move up the rank. I had lots of people, bartenders and waiters, that had outside business activities, just like producers that have outside business. Like, I didn't want to be in management. I wanted to build my business, and I didn't want to move up the food chain. I wanted to stay just the financial planner. So you think everybody wants to move up? No, that is untrue. We had wives working for us that were working part-time, that did processing, that did, like, KJ was a wife, and she was my administrative assistant, and she worked part-time. We had cold callers that were women, and women can be callers. They can work cold calling from home, you know that, and they can work for all kinds of call centers and that. You get them a computer. As I told KJ, where did I learn this from? John Hancock. What did John Hancock do? They said, okay, we don't want to do what Vanguard did. Open a office down south, open an office in Arizona. So what did they do? They said, no, we'll just keep it in Boston. And they said, we'll give them designated cell phones and laptops. Cell phones and laptops. Why? Because when it was a snow day, and it snows heavily in Boston at times, and they can't get in, it's work as normal. And they use their laptop and their cell phone, and it goes into the queue, and it gets routed to the cell phone. They have call forwarding on the desk phones, right? Well, the system is set up to automatically forward to their cell phone. And so I would ask, how's things going in Boston? Yeah, I'm working from home today. Because, it was snowed out, and basically better for me to be here than spend hours trying to get to work. And so they did the opposite. It cut their expenditures. Vanguard has higher expenditures. So they did it in a different way. They didn't give us cell phones. We had to go into the office. They created remote offices. Then we started moving to the Philippines, and they made a mistake. Not because my tech support from the Philippines and El Salvador, those people were really good. My internal tech support for John Hancock from the Philippines was excellent. And I used to work with them on Saturdays. I could call tech support on Saturdays. And I would go in and do all my tech updates on Saturdays. And the funny thing is, most of the time, who did I talk to? Females in the Philippines. I don't know why, but every time I got a female tech support. Now, El Salvador, I got a male. But with the Philippines, I always got females. And some of them I talked to multiple times, I was getting a big crush on. But the whole point is, what John Hancock now outsourced Boston, for internal producers. But the thing is, in Boston, you have all the microfiche, you had all the legacy producers. And I said, they made a mistake. They had to do training. John and all the people are dealing with were there for 20, 30, 40 years plus. And even in our high-end planning division, those people were with the firm for like 40, 50 years. They've been around for a long time. And so I ask them stuff like our daily policies, our weekly policies. They actually knew all that. And when it went to the Philippines, you couldn't ask them for this assistance because they didn't know all of these legacies, and John Hancock didn't train them right. And they wanted to outsource, but it made it much harder for me as a producer. Because I could tell them and go back into the legacy policies, and I could talk to them about them because they dealt with them and were trained on them, that we could have in-depth discussion about design and everything. And these people were awesome, unbelievable resources. And they became all my friends because I talked to them so frequently. And, we got to be really good friends over the phone. They were awesome people. But the thing, when they moved to the Philippines, they didn't do that intense training. And so you can't just open a call center. They have to have training and ongoing training and so on, so they can be an external resource for the producers. So when they call up and you're like, yeah, I have this old annuity from Prudential, and say it's Prudential, and, they obviously don't issue these anymore. And how does this function? Truly. Or you can create a YouTube database from them, and they can say, here's the link and video, but still, if I have questions, I need somebody to answer my effing questions. So, again, they didn't do the handoff correctly. You can't just dump it on them and you screw your people because they don't have the resources, meaning they don't have the intellectual capital to answer the questions. And there are so many nuances about the policies, it's incredible, from the risk parameters to everything else. And so, again, they were an incredible resource. And so I learned so much from them. They could answer so many questions, it's unbelievable. It was awesome, them with all their senior staff, and they liked their jobs. They weren't looking to move up. They actually liked what they were doing and so on, and they had other stuff they did outside. Like at Vanguard, I worked with ex-airline pilot and many ex-bankers that retired from banking, and they started at Vanguard at 60. So this is back in 1999, 27 years ago, that going on 28, that they already fully retired. They were in their 60s and mid-60s, like David. He became my partner at 60 years old. He was just starting his financial advisory career. Not winding down life like you're doing to me. I'm not some fucking black person. I have things, and I've proven through the history of my life, I heal. So whatever I'm dealt with, I overcome naturally, biologically. So if I'm not healing, somebody's fucking with me. Because by 2009, no matter the stresses, I healed. It was gone. No voices, no nothing. Gone. So 2005, and I lost Jen and had massive, and I still healed. And so it might take a little bit longer because I'm older, but no fucking way I'm not healing. I understand biology and chemistry. And if I'm not healing, that means you should be fucking killed. Because there's no way you're not fucking with me. And that's how God knows. And I warned you. I naturally heal. And if I'm not healing, you're fucked. That's how I was designed to protect myself from all you fucking pieces of shit. That I can take your shit and heal from it. And if I'm not healing, they should be killing you motherfuckers. Because you're certainly killing me. So the proof's in the pudding. And that's why I keep on getting more and more frustrated. Bull fucking shit, this tinnitus. There is no fucking way that I have hearing damage. None. I didn't work on a garbage truck going, and the exposure to loud noise was very short. Truly, we didn't have loud noise in Charlie's and any of that. Baja was when I was much younger and much more resilient. And me and Jen, we went to lounges, not loud clubs. So me and Michael went to movies and other things. And so I wasn't allowed. And all those things that happened before were a long fucking time ago. So that means you must be fucking wicked as shit. Yeah, all the police vans, that's nice. But I heal. That's my superpower. As my therapist said, you're perfectly reset. There's no trace of anything. You're good to go. You don't need any drugs. So, they're not me. So, stop thinking I'm them. I am not them. We are different biologically. So, truly, that's why I listed out everything. All the things that I got over, recovered, tendonitis, everything. It naturally goes away. I get it. My body learns how to overcome it, and it goes away. Like this mite. I haven't seen this since I've been a child. And I never had outbreaks until recently. And you say coming back, it shouldn't be coming back. So again, things naturally heal. That's why different blood groups have different things. If not, then everybody would have the same issue. And that's why a doctor's office has to get a spread of risk by what? By blood type. Not only by sex, but by blood type and by age. If you're building a practice, you do blood work. You know it. You set out the demographics. Okay, I'm too concentrated in this area, and I want to get a spread of it. Unless you're going to go deeper and be a specialist in that area, then you have to figure out, but me, there's 1 in every 10 million or more. So you're not going to get a lot of me. So if you think about that, let's see, every 100 million, let's just take every 10 million. It's actually, I think, greater, but every 10 million. So every 100 million, that's 10 people. So there's 34 people in the United States that have my blood type. You're not going to build much of a practice on people like me. So again, when you're building out a practice, you have to understand these ratios and what you have. And then that shows you what exposures are natural and what you're going to have to be prepared for, and how you as a physician need to treat people. You need to treat them, and then you overlap it by their community, like syphilis in the black community. And you have to be talking to young black people as a doctor, truly a pediatrician, about syphilis. If you're going to hang around a lot of other black people, that you have to understand what your exposures are in your community. When you move outside as a black person, like Tracy with John, he doesn't have syphilis, and it's not many white people have syphilis. But if you're going to stay around a lot of black people, then you're naturally going to have higher exposure to syphilis. But that's fine. You, each other knows that, and you protect. So you don't have to be mean. They have to do their thing, you do your thing, and if you work together, they don't have any claims like, oh, you got me this and you got me that. Well, I did my thing, and you did your precautions, and we protected each other. And it's a mutual protection class system. That's what they call civilization. Do you know that? That's what a civilized society does? Why do you think we have an army? And nations have armies and that. And they fund them. Mutual protection for their citizens. So again, it's a mutual protection pact. A National Guard is a mutual protection pact for the state. It's actually a false statement when you say National Guard. It's really a state guard. deployed each state guard together creates a national guard. And so one state guard has another state guard's back, creating a national guard. So that's what the borders are all wrong. You have Border Patrol, but behind that you have National Guard and then the state police. And then behind that you have the county and local and their layers of protection. But the first on the borders from California all the way along, and what do we have outside of Border Patrol? Coast Guards. And the coast goes all the way around, even up in Canada with the Great Lakes and that, we have Coast Guards, or we should. That's international waters up there. I mean, that should be Coast Guard in those things between Canada and the United States. Those waterways need to be taken care of by Coast Guards, but backed up by the National Guards for Wyoming, South Dakota, or North Dakota. And if they did that in Arizona, all that desert region inside the border would have been protected, and the National Guard works with the state police, who work with the county police, who work with the local police. It's coordinated. Border Patrol, and we're talking the border, so it goes from the Coast Guard to the Border Patrol, which is the Port Authority and so on in New York. So it goes from the Coast Guard to the Port Authority, and the Port Authority works with the National Guard, and that works with the state police, that works with the county and local. And Homeland Security is supposed to have been perfecting this. But all those regions can be filled in, because what does the National Guard have that the state police doesn't? Access to military satellites and military capability. So National Guards, they have tanks, they have military helicopters. They're a military force. That's why they call them National Guard, but it is a national military. Our Army and others, those deal with things outside our borders more. Outside the Coast Guard, they deal in international territory. That's why we have 80 countries, 750 bases. Our military stops the threat outside of our borders. Our National Guard deals with threats inside our borders with military action. They're legally allowed to use military tactics in states. And they have access to all this military capability. And who do they support? SWAT. So when you have a SWAT movement and they need extra tactical support, they can tap into the National Guard, and if they need a fucking tank, well, a tank you get. So make no mistake about it, they bring in the heavy, and that's what the National Guard is supposed to do, to bring in the heavy. And if you need to execute serious, heavy combat tactics in the state, they roll out. They have tanks, they have fighter planes, they have all of that. And so 9/11 was supposed to be handled by the National Guard. They can have F-35 National Guards. Make no mistake, that's what George Bush, he flew for the National Guard. He was a fighter pilot. So 9/11 was supposed to have National Guard, and they protect the airspace. A military capability to every airspace, 50 states and U.S. territories should have National Guard, and they have military capability. And if you need to bring in the true heavy, they can call in a SWAT team. If they need a heavy, they should be able to turn immediately to the National Guard and say, we need a heavy. And they can give them satellite surveillance and everything. They have all that military capability. They can jointly use military satellites, the National Guard. So they can bring in the fucking heavy. They carry M16s, or now is it M something, but they carry the heavy. So when the president comes to the state, they deploy the National Guard. They bring in the heavy. So it's all supposed to work together. So the cartels would be fucked. So they can work with the FBI, the DEA. If they need the fucking heavy, they can bring in military combat troops right here legally through the National Guard. And so if they need to fuck up cartel and they need to stick a fucking M1 Abrams tank up their fucking ass, they can roll it out and fucking light them up. So it's funny how the FBI in that, they don't deploy them, but they have access to them and they can deploy them. And they're supposed to work in this joint operations through Homeland Security. We're not supposed to have this stupidity anymore. So whether it's federal, state, county, or local, they need the heavy. The heavy is right there. And they can be deployed instantly. That's the purpose. And we have bad leadership. What does fucking Pritzker know about military tactics with the National Guard? Does he know how he can deploy them and how he can use them and integrate them into state security? Does he? Because when you're electing a governor has to be an incredibly sophisticated individual. They run military units. Those units are in the National Guard, from Air Force to ground units and all kinds of water units, you name it. And they need to understand this. And then what the state police does, and how the federal, the DEA, the ATF, the FBI work within the state, because they have to work with these federal agencies. So if you're a governor, you have to be incredibly fucking sophisticated. That's why Reagan, managing California, an incredibly sophisticated demographic state, made for a good president. And that's why I said when John McCain chose the female from Alaska, I was against her. Not because she was female, because the complexity of that state and what it deals with is not something she can handle on a national level. She doesn't have the fucking skill base. So when you're looking at these people, the sophistication of where they're coming from, the challenges they had to deal with, give them the tools they need to accomplish. So you have to look at their abilities. And that makes a difference, picking the right leadership. And the voting populace is so fucking stupid. And they pick these people, and you're looking down, what the fuck are your capabilities? Show me your success in all these different things that you need to manage? How have you managed local law enforcement? How have you worked with private security? Truly, all these buildings and that, do you know about that? What technology, what capability? Because you're responsible as the mayor of Chicago for the security of the city. And you need to work with the county police, the state police, the National Guard, federal agencies. You're managing 3 million people. You need to be highly sophisticated. Mayor Daley didn't have any of those capabilities. You put in incredibly shitty leadership, and the parties do a horrible job in recruiting talent. Do you know the Democratic and Republican Party should be looking for talent and mentoring talent and putting people in things where you become an alderman and you build up your skill base, and you might start in a small ward and you build up your skill base as an alderman and you move up. How many aldermen have become mayor? Because that's where it should go from. And how well did you do working with your fellow aldermen? How many subcommittees? Because City of Chicago, aldermen in the city have subcommittees, I would assume. And if they don't, they should. And you can be in a small ward, but you work with larger wards and you talk to them, you interact with them, and you learn your expertise. In a larger ward, you have more sophisticated stuff going on, and you need to be a more sophisticated individual. So your aldermen, you have to be highly selective. And I really do fault the parties for not having standards of how they recruit people and mentor people. And these people shouldn't be able to run if they're not well trained and well educated for the position. They have to prove their ability to be moral and ethical and be able to handle matters of extremely sophisticated nature. And truly. And so we fuck up. And then we think, oh, well, you know, you vote for like Chuy Garcia. Well, he's a good promoter. But he's not. It's like Obama. He was a good community organizer, and he's a constitutional lawyer, but he had no idea how to run the assets. He didn't run economic. He wasn't like Gordon Tullock, who did constitutional economics, and he taught law at the University of Chicago, and he understood deeply economic theory and legal premise of economic theory, and he was my teacher, and I used to write him, and I used to interact with him and everything, and he became a Nobel Prize laureate for rent theory, and he should have won because it was his idea but they decided to just give it to his partner. But I always recognized him as a Nobel Prize winner because he did win it. They didn't recognize him because they didn't like his self-promotion. You're supposed to be humble. He was outspoken. And they didn't like people that are outspoken. So truly, that's how he didn't get it. They didn't like his arrogance. They wanted people to be more meek and humble and let the work speak for itself. And that's what he did wrong. He shouldn't have did self-promotion. He should have extended his paper out to economic places. Like he could have given it to governors and that on rent seeking, because we studied all this, freeloaders. Rent seeking is about freeloaders. His expertise is identifying freeloaders. Do you know that? That's all the theory of rent seeking is people that are freeloaders, finding them, and also people that don't rent seek, and those people that know fairness. So it's not only identifying freeloaders, it's identifying people that are fair and how fair are they. But we went into the whole welfare plan and that, and looking at freeloaders. And he's a specialist at identifying freeloaders. People using the legal system incorrectly, freeloading on it, looking for a free lunch, looking for free lawsuits and everything else. They're looking to entrap you. So, again, that's all about that. And so that's the risk management. But we have to do a better job. The Republican Party, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, truly. And they're fighting for talent, and you have to recruit a mentor. When people get in this and they want to move down that route, they have to have internal mentoring. Where the hell is the Republican Party, Green Party, the Democratic Party, their mentoring system? Where are their certifications and designations they do within the Republican Party? And you get these educational, truly, you go to, and this is where educational institutions like University of Chicago or Northwestern or UIC or North Park College, they can build out educational programs for them. And these certifications you take, even if you're a mayor of Chicago, to keep your mayorship, you can get different certifications or designations as a government official. And you're certified in domestic violence and, domestic violence reduction certification. Truly. You're certified in government economics. You're certified in municipal management. You're certified in law enforcement management. And so they can build out certifications and designations. Designations gets credentials. Certification, you just get that you finished it. You get a certificate. Designation, you get CFP, CFA, those are designations. And they come with ongoing continuous education. A certification doesn't have continuous education. A designation comes with continuous education.